Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion organized by International Economic and Legal Forum in association with Welch Associates as knowledge partner. The topic of today's panel discussion is suspension of initiation under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code as per the recent ordinance of 5th of June 2020. I am Gaurav Verma and I'm part of corporate litigation team of Welch Associates. To enlighten us with their views on this topic, we have a panel of distinguished speakers. Our first panelist is Mr. Balwinder Singh. Mr. Balwinder Singh is a technical member of National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. He joined State Bank of India in 1978 as a probationary officer, and in 1981 he joined the Indian Audit and Account Services. Before joining National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, he served as Deputy CAG of India. We also have with us today Dr. Charan Singh. Dr. Singh is currently serving as a non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank. He's a renowned economist. He's also serving as director of National Housing Bank, Delhi, NABARD Financial Services, Bangalore. He's also a member of governing body of at Policy Foundation, New Delhi, a member of the Informal Advisory Group on Housing Sector Issues, International Monetary Fund, Washington, DC. Mr. A.S. Chandiok, senior advocate, has also joined us today. Mr. Chandiok is a designated senior advocate practicing in Supreme Court and High Courts in India. He is president of Insol India, a former additional Solicitor General of India. Mr. Chandiok is the only Indian lawyer till date to be the principal counsel of European Union Commission for 3 years. From Welch Associates, we have Mr. Satwinder Singh and Mr. NPS Chawla. Mr. Satwinder Singh heads the corporate practice of Welch Associates at New Delhi. A lawyer by profession, he is also a qualified company secretary, a registered insolvency professional, and a certified associate of Indian Institute of Bankers. He has approximately about 28 years of experience in legal profession. He has extensive experience in handling corporate law matters, including mergers and acquisitions, corporate restructuring, private equity, banking and securitization, takeovers, and many more. Our last panelist is Mr. NPS Chawla. Mr. NPS Chawla is a senior member of the corporate litigation and corporate restructuring practice at New Delhi office of Welch Associates. He is also a qualified company secretary and registered insolvency professional. He has a wide experience of handling litigation matters in different courts and tribunals, including the National Company Law Tribunal, High Courts, Supreme Court. He is a council member of Institute of Company Secretaries of India. Dr. M.S. Sahu, Chairman IBBI, is unable to join us today because of health reasons, but I welcome all our panelists and all attendees for this panel discussion. The first question which needs to be addressed is as to what does this ordinance contemplate? So I invite Mr. NPS Chawla to explain us the crux of the ordinance.
Thank you, Gaurav, for this detailed introduction which you gave. But I feel the kind of panelists which we have today, these all are our mentors. So at the outset, thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh, Dr. Charan Singh, Chandiok Saab. I've been interacting with all of them so often, and we have been learning from them each day. And thank you, sirs, for taking time. And Satwinder sir obviously is our Jagat mentor. We call him Satwinder sir, Satwinder sir. That's how we call him. It's very unfortunate Dr. Sahu called up that he's a little unwell, and because of which he has cancelled all his programs for today. In fact, he was supposed to be part of another program at 3 o'clock, which also he had to cancel. Friends, I feel Gaurav has asked me to give you overall perspective of the ordinance. Now, if I see the ordinance, it's a small ordinance. 2 sections have been introduced, 10A and section 66(3). But a lot of noise this ordinance has made since the time this has been made effective. In fact, I remember on 24th of March, in fact, 24th of March holds a lot of relevance because that was the first day when Honorable Prime Minister announced lockdown first lockdown from 25th of March. And from 24th of March, the threshold limit was increased from 1 lakh to 1 crore under Section 4. And that power government already had because of the proviso of Section 4. Although the insolvency committee report, which was earlier submitted in February this year, advised to increase the limit from 1 lakh to 50 lakhs, but actually the government increased the limit from 1 lakh to 1 crore. And thereafter, now on 5th of June, this ordinance has come. So this ordinance, as far as I see, has three parts. One is the preamble, and second is the introduction of Section 10A, and the third is the introduction of Section 66, subsection 3. So as far as the preamble is concerned, if you see, preamble talks about suspension of provisions of 7, 9, 10. First, obviously, it talks about the already mechanism which is there for the IBC ecosystem is already set. Country has done marvelous job by introducing this law. But then now it was said that pandemic lockdown is there. Therefore, we'll have to consider this as a unprecedented situation. So if I read from the preamble, it says that it is considered expedient to exclude the defaults arising on account of unprecedented situation. Now just mark this, and how when they include this substantive part of the provision in 10A, in my view, there is a change. Here in the preamble, the intent was to exclude the defaults arising on account of unprecedented situation. Now, this unprecedented situation, obviously, people were earlier thinking whether only COVID default would be excluded and what would be the COVID default, whether adjudicating authority will decide. To avoid this, government introduced 10A. Now, when you see 10A, 10A talks of three things again. 10A1 has the substantive provision, then is the proviso, and then is the explanation. 10A in itself says, the first part of it deals with non-filing. So it says that no application for initiation of CIRP shall be filed. Now just mark these words, that no application shall be filed. For what defaults? For any default arising on or after 25th March. So no application shall be filed for any default arising on or after, which means after 25th March, for a period of 6 months or for such period as may be notified, which would be maximum 1 year. So the first question, which we'll be separately asking all the panelists, because this ordinance, honestly, instead of answering, has left many questions unanswered. And there are many ambiguities which we all can see, and I'm sure we have such an eminent panelist today. Although Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh has already pointed out to us that mentioned this in the beginning, that my comments and my feedback and my opinion here is only for academic purpose, and I should not be quoted the same opinion when you argue matters before your lordship. And similarly, we have Dr. Charan Singh, who also holds a very important position as a banker. In fact, we are lucky that all our 4 panelists today are connected with the banking system. Satwinder ji is a CA, IB. Chandok Saab started, I remember, I have always been hearing that he started his career as a lawyer for a reputed bank, and that's how he has become a legend. Dr. Charan Singh needs no introduction. He is a economist par excellence. And Mr. Balwinder Singh also started his career with SBI. So I'm sure all the IPs and all the other bankers who have joined us today would be really excited to hear their views and their interpretation. So as far as 10A is concerned, friends, in my view and my reading, which would be corrected by Chandok Saab particularly later on when he speaks, is that 10A, first part of it, the substantive part, deals with non-filing of applications for any default arising after 25th March. But if you see, the wordings are that no application shall be filed for any default after 25th March for a period of 6 months or for a period of 1 year. So the first question which is asked to us is whether this filing is only stopped for 6 months or 1 year, but then it is expanded. So then the proviso excludes this COVID default. The defaults arising after 25th March are excluded from the purview of default itself. That's how it reads, that no application shall ever be filed. And the explanation then clarifies, which I have my own doubt whether it clarifies or it again confuses further. And I'll pose a question to Chandok Saab later on, that it says that whatever defaults were committed prior to 25th March, certainly applications for those matters can be filed. Section 66 subsection 3 is also introduced. Section 66, friends, deals with unlawful trading. Section 66 subsection 1 and 2, there is no change. Subsection 3 has been introduced, which says that notwithstanding anything contained in this section, no application shall be filed by a resolution professional in respect of such default against which initiation of CIRP is suspended under 10A. Now, people are asking us whether this is a leeway to the promoters to do fraud. In my view, no. This only clarifies because subsection 2, so they say that subsection 1 of 66 is different from subsection 2, which we will separately take up in the questions. We have already received many questions. But in my view, this subsection 3 only clarifies that whenever a due diligence is required to be exercised. So subsection 2 deals with a provision that if a director or KMP has not exercised due diligence and was anticipating that the company would go in CIRP and still not has exercised due diligence, then they will be asked to compensate the loss. Now here they say that now today it is in the offing. We know that the company would do default. That's how government has suspended the provisions against the corporate person and the corporate debtor itself. So that's how this benefit is given only with regard to subsection 2, to the extent that the due diligence cannot be exercised, because everybody is aware now the defaults would be occurring certainly in this COVID period. Having said so, there are many questions which we have already received and which we'll ask and discuss, and all practical questions. Before we go on to those questions, let me ask Satvinder sir, that sir, what is your view, since now IBC, in a way, the new initiation for the defaults which will be occurring after 25th March is suspended already. Now how the resolutions would take place? So what is this mechanism of resolutions outside IBC? Satvinder sir.
Thank you, NPS. I think you have set the tone by explaining and showing that the ambiguities which are going to come in the ordinance itself, where I think we were discussing for the last so many days, and there are the questions which we have received. I think we have jotted down the questions which have come from the people. I think that is making that shows the ambiguities arising in that ordinance. But nevertheless, let that as it is, maybe. The question which you have asked, and before I answer your question, let me also say that I share the same thing with Balwinder Singh ji. I'm also I also joined as a State Bank of India before I left and started into the private sector. NPS, the question is that now if there is a suspension and what could be the resolution, let me just take you, because earlier, if you see, we had under the RBI mechanism, the CDR scheme, we had the strategic debt restructuring scheme, then we had the S4 guidelines and all that. So in February 2018, that all were you see withdrawn, and the RBI came out with the circular sometime in February 2018, and that circular was also challenged, where the Supreme Court said, no, you can't go for that. It requires 100% consent. It is against that policy of that RBI Act and other things. So that circular was withdrawn, but that in June, decision came sometime in April 2019. But that RBI then made it a case that, okay, June 7, 2017, they set up a new revised framework where it was broadly a concept of a intercreditor agreement. That was the one part where they have given 180 days. It's like a moratorium from the financial creditors. But mind it, this circular is only applicable on those banks and financial institutions which are under the purview of the RBI, not for all. So, but largely these are the bankers which are coming, they are the financial creditors which are coming for this thing. But if you look at it, even after the resolution plan is given, and if it is not implemented within that plan, there is no timeline within which it is there. Rather, they are giving it is that the bankers will provide further provisions to that part. Now, that is a one part where we are talking about where under the IBC, your resolution was be approved with 66%. But here they said that, okay, you approve it with 75%, along with majority in number is a 60%. So that's, they said that, okay, if in number 60%, it is 70%. I would say that, okay, it is binding. It's like an intercreditor agreement. But I am taking you to the provisions of section 230. Now, if you look at section 230, it talks about that there has to be a compromise. It talks, so the compromise is that, okay, you can have even a compromise even with the creditors, even a class of creditors, not under 232, come with the 230 only for this. But then there is a requirement that, okay, if you are coming with 230, it has to be approved by at least 3/4 of that majority, but and majority number. So even under 230, that is there. Fortunately, if you see this, when this Companies Act came, they provided the CDR mechanism and the 230 provisions also. That you come out with a scheme, you give this, that, okay, how you are taking that interest of the unsecured creditors and other creditors, and whatever the scheme you are giving, how you will specify and how you will maintain the cash flows, that has been given. You have to provide the liquidity test, and there is nothing, there is only a form which is given. And if you get that CDR mechanism approved under the provisions of the Companies Act, under section 230, even then, I think once that scheme is approved under 230, there is a SK Gupta judgment even of the Supreme Court, that once the scheme is approved under the provisions of section 230 with the requisite majority of the shareholders and the requisite majority of the creditors, now that will be considered as binding on all the dissenting shareholders and creditors. So the advantage which I'm just looking at it is, one, that if you can make a combo, why that you look at the June 7 circular, you can take a scheme, have a discussion with the lenders, which I'm just making it is because why I'm saying so is that after this suspension, and the bankers have already started it, that, okay, we will not get a good resolution applicant, we will not be making it is, and probably in one of the matter which are started now is, particularly you look at it, that there is a company which is already a CIRP is going on, holding company, they have the subsidiaries down the line which are doing the EPC, money will come into the wholly owned subsidiaries which are not under the CIRP mechanism. Now bankers are confused that, but the holding company has given a guarantee for the loans taken by the subsidiaries, and if you, and they have, lenders of the subsidiary have invoked the guarantees, so they become an unsecured creditor through that aspect. So that becomes a problem, that, okay, whether I should go for a group insolvency or I should go for, and then the bankers have realized, even if I go for a resolution, I will not mark a good value. And then the probably in subsidiaries also, lot of matters are under arbitration, and they expect, and they have got that study done, that they expect a reasonable value out of it. If you leave that as it is, resolution applicant is not giving you the value, liquidator, if it go into the liquidation, your maybe that your arbitration will be in jeopardized, and that way could be. So the bankers are wary, and they are showing, why not I withdraw it under 12A, and they have agreed to some extent that, okay, we will file it, let's make a scheme, put it before under the NCLT under section 230, they will also make it under the resolution plan under the provisions of June 7 circular, try to make a combo, make it that, okay, how best they can create value out of it. So the point which I'm just making it is, people have already started, the bankers have also started working on this thing, is how best they can realize a better value. Is it possible because of this suspension, they can't wait for another 6 months or 1 year, and then probably they will think about that, okay, how they can be going, how best they can achieve that value, where June 7 circular was also intended to be a resolution outside IBC. So I'm just making it is, if it is a combo between the two, probably you will give a binding effect. The only thing is, where maybe, which I have this thing, if I see section 459 of the Companies Act, there are enough power to the NCLT also in that case, where they can approve it. But let that it is maybe whether the moratorium will be there, but the moratorium you can have it from the lender side. As far as the lender side is concerned, that moratorium you can avail under the intercreditor agreement, under the June 7 circular. So there are various factors which you can have it and make a combo, and you can achieve what you feel that it can be achieved on that part. That's my summation is there are possibilities that if it is not coming, bankers and other financial creditors will start looking at the alternative means.
Okay. Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Balwinder Singh. Sir, before we start the panel discussion, what are your thoughts about the ordinance, particularly when all the corners are of the view that this ordinance has left many ambiguities unanswered, particularly prior period default, that is whether the default is prior to 25th of March 2020 or not, which will lead to increase in litigation before adjudicatory forums till each issue is decided by the apex court. What are your views on this?
Now you see, the ordinance has come into picture with some sort of public policy. You see, and the public policy is with practical implications. You see, whether the code evolution, because whatever resolutions have to come, they have to come as a commercial sense, and the business mode or the business confidence, whatever is available in the country, it is going to impact our values, irrespective whether we like it or not, irrespective whether there is a law or there is not law. You see the here, when we talk about maximizing the value, but the value itself is a variable figure. What is maximized only is sort of without stated also it is maximum, because nobody wants to make a resolution without maximizing himself. I mean, this is a parameter within which, and environment parameter of the business, which is always preconditioned. Now, the default has taken place prior to 25th. Already probably some applications are also there. I am quite sure it has to be impacted by the business, because the commercial decisions have to be taken. And when we talk about commercial decision, means all forces are to be considered, whether it is a business conditions, whether it is a health condition, it is economic condition, because they are all put together into one system. So we have to look this. Basically, I always take it from 3 points of view. The first point of view is what the law we made. The law, we have a background. Some we have assumptions. Assumptions are sometimes database, sometimes they are not database. But the fact is there is a sort of gut feeling. Now the government has come out, there is a gut feeling that because of disruption in business, it is probably expected that within 2, 3, 4, 5 months, this is going to severely impact the business environment. And if it is severely, and which may be temporary phase, I mean, that is what the assumption is, either 6 months or 1 year, because the assumption is optimistically it may be 6 months. At worst condition, probably it is 1 year. So this is some sort of gut feeling and assumption taken. So under this condition, probably 3 to 6 months, we may not be able to go ahead with which too much uncertainty in facing our decisions. If too much uncertainty, irrespective of whatever we do, values will not be forthcoming. Under uncertainty model of decision making itself, what will happen? You see, the people who give a great margin for risk, and which means any person who will come as a resolution applicant, even if he sees that his value is about, say, let's suppose 100, he will make a risk factor something like 25% or so. And in case he is expecting this uncertainty will continue for more, he may probably risk factor 50% also. I'm not saying, I'm only making a business sense out of it. You see, so probably if you look into the law part basically when you talk about COVID, business infrastructure, etc., this is what is a sort of anticipated thing. It is not based on a data, because data will keep you. Similarly, like when we call our valuations and all, estimated values are also estimates only till actually something bids come on your fold. When the bids only come in a fold, that gets impacted when the bid is given. Irrespective of the case, whether registered earlier, started earlier, applications, bids asked for, you see, there is no something you can shy away from the date when the bid will come. Because we have noted that the bids and the people started actually having a doubt on the bids. Now, what I was only trying to make it is that one is the legality part, the other part is the practicability part. Now, practicability means whosoever will enter into the field, he will be also risk averse. Now, bankers are also basically risk averse because they will like to also not take so much value loss, which probably think that this decision may be unwise. Risk averse also impacts our decision to accept a proposal also. So anyway, because I always, the third part which always normally have to be taken care, it is actually the propriety part. Whether somebody is taking advantage out of the system, because the law had to make a protection. I mean, I'm making little bit reference to 29 and not, because the propriety part is also there. Will we allow somebody to take away the benefits only because there is a perception of the from the legal side that this disruption minimum was about 6 months, maximum probably about 1 year. In between this disruption, we do not want the value losses should be immediately taken, and there has to be some sort of normalcy within which the resolution should take place. I think probably this is what probably I wish and I feel the environment within which this ordinance has been drafted, and people will take business people, resolution applicant, bankers, everybody, they will take into consideration what is best for them. So the moratorium, I mean, I'm not calling moratorium, it is indirect moratorium of instituting the cases, isn't it? Other moratorium is probably once some cases admitted moratorium so that it is cooling off period. But this is a general cooling off period. I think as far as the second part was, which was basically I feel outside IBC has always been there. But the real story is, I mean, the real impact is even their decisions are on practicability only. Their decisions are only on the practicability, what bids and offers are coming to us. Because nobody will like to lose it in either being panicky, because neither bankers can be panicky, nor our business people can be panicky. Because if in a panic, our optimal solutions will not come. I think probably this is what my preliminary. So thank you.
I think Gaurav, sir has really made a point that yes, sometimes the public policy has to prevail on certain things, and in that sense, maybe that's confusion. So I think the point well taken, sir. Before, I think we should ask Mr. Chandok, and we will have that panel discussion. Charan Singh ji, I think we all regard you as one of the great economists. You have not only taught students in India, but you were the professor in the overseas university in US also. And now specifically you were called to head the Punjab and Sindh Bank. Now, since now I'm not taking asking you as a banker, but I'm asking you as an economist. Normally when the IBC came, one of the reason was for ease of doing business to improve, and with the advent of IBC, probably our rating has also been improved. But now with the ordinance, what impact you feel have the economic impact because of this ordinance which is coming? Can you just share your thoughts on it?
First of all, let me thank you all for getting me on your panel and speaking to your audience. So that's very kind of you. The second thing I would like to say at the outset, I am speaking to you as an economist. I generally, when I come on different forums, I don't even mention that I chair a bank. It's a public sector bank. Government has been kind to appoint me as the non-executive chair, but I'm speaking to you today purely as an economist and not using that title and that privilege in any way. Now, the question that you have posed is, you're right, as far, and you must have seen my work on the banking sector. You will see it on the website of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Couple of working papers are there and other articles are there. You can have a look at it. And I've also worked on frauds and the public sector banks. So some idea and some background would be there. So I don't take that much time here. I just come straight to the question, but for background, you can look up at those places. Now, the issue is that the resolution of stressed assets and non-performing assets and assets which are on the balance sheet, they have to be addressed. There are various ways to do it. You know, the stock of the bad bank has also started. Various countries follow different pattern, and different countries, given their economic circumstances, their banking sector structure, different methods are suitable. In our own country, if you remember, and I have been working in the Reserve Bank for a very long time. And by the way, I used to, I'm the 1983 batch of Punjab National Bank as a management trainee. So from there, I moved into the Reserve Bank. In any case, some experience of the banking industry, both as a commercial banker and then at the regulator side. And then, of course, I moved to IMF in Washington, so you get to get a picture, the global perspective there. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that banking is really sector specific and also country specific. There can't be universal laws in banking. One of the reasons I say that India should reconsider Basel norms. Similarly, when it comes to the resolution of stressed assets, different countries have different mechanisms. In our country, somehow the DRT and SARFAESI, though they were there, not delivering. But when IBC came in after lots of requests from the industry, when IBC came in, it started showing excellent results. You're right, it helped in the ease of doing business, helped in the resolution of stressed assets, and certainly in our global rating, it made a dent. Now, when this COVID-19 happened, and there's a general moratorium across the country, not only across the country, across the world, one has to see how have the others addressed it. So you'll be surprised to know that many countries have suspended their similar laws, like the one which we have in IBC, and the debtors and the creditors, they have to understand that the world is in a difficult situation. So therefore, pulling anybody into the court, asking them for resolution of stressed assets under these circumstances is not correct. So keeping this in mind, and we all know what is going to happen in days to come, and this has been also documented in government reports, especially the economic survey, where they speak about the twin balance sheet. If the corporate sector is not doing well, it's obvious that the lending institution and the banking sector cannot also be doing well. Because at the end of the day, the two balance sheets are highly interrelated. Given that COVID has hit us in a very unique way, it's different from 2008. In 2008, as you know, the epicenter was USA, then it traveled to Europe and then came over to other countries. COVID has made the world flat. If today we are closed in Lucknow and Delhi, so is London and DC also closed today. So it's made the world flat. So trade gets impacted. Obviously, business houses and businesses and manufacturing, everything gets impacted. Exports and imports get impacted. And this recognition has to be there, while the regulator has to take a call and say, okay, now what sort of an accommodation do I provide both the institutions? I have to provide some thing to the banking industry, I regulate them, but I have also to assure the sector, the industry and the economy and the manufacturing sector that we realize the stress on you and we are ready to accommodate you, and to some extent also ready to be liberal and kind. What I mean by the last two words, liberal and kind, in Western part of the world, they have said even if your debt has increased, we'll still not bring you into the bankruptcy situation. So we'll allow you some more. So in case later on the banks want to give a top up or want to help the institutions, yes, we will allow you to accommodate that, take some more time, recover, plan, and then we will see what best to do. So the point and the key thing that I'm trying to make is the recognition by both the world, advanced and emerging countries, by both the regulator and the government, is that the times are very, very choppy and uneven. Markets are very, very uncertain. So there is a need to provide a sort of accommodation for a short time to both the manufacturer as well as the lender. This, I think, is keeping in mind the global pattern, also keeping in mind that ease of doing business continues to be easy in our country and our ranking there doesn't slip. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Gaurav, you have any point?
Mr. Chandok, my next question is for you. That the preamble of the ordinance talks of shortage of resolution applicants, but it is not captured in the substantive provision of section 10A. So do you think that the adjudicatory authority will be flooded with applications in pending CIRP matters where the resolution plans have already been approved but yet not implemented, seeking extension of time and relaxations? In a way, is the intent of the ordinance also a breather to the resolution applicants?
Thank you so much, all of you, to give me this opportunity to be among such luminaries. I was wondering that I'm actually in an ocean and a little drop when I see luminaries around. Gaurav, the first point that I wish to make is that a preamble does not get incorporated in a statute ever. Preamble only gives you what is the aim or the object for which that statute is being brought. For the purpose of interpretation of section 10A, you may look at 10 preamble to see what could be the intent of the government to do so, or the legislature or the ordinance to do so. Therefore, first part is, in law, I do not incorporate what is the object of the act, or I do not incorporate preamble of the act especially into the statutory provision. To go to your direct question, whether this will give me a leverage to a resolution applicant whose resolution plan is already over and approved under section 31, then the NCLT, or for that matter adjudicating authority, is functus officio. Where is that jurisdiction? There's no power of review. There's no power to do anything. But at the same time, please consider if these are circumstances. If a resolution or the monitoring committee is able to bring before an NCLT, or for that matter, even the resolution applicant who would have, if he's already approved, then he would have taken over the corporate debtor. So he is actually the corporate debtor now. So the corporate debtor may go back to the NCLT or to the NCLT, as the case may be, to go back and say these are impediments created not by me, not because I did not implement it, because the circumstances have come which are beyond my reach, and consequently I should have taken 2 more steps. I have not been able to do it. Please condone it. Possible. But I don't think it can be a situation where you will be able to ask for rechange of the resolution plan. Take an example. A question was put the other day to one of our panelists, and very eminent panelists, on a question with respect to insolvency, to say, can I bring force majeure clause in a resolution plan? No, that was a contract that you brought in. That was approved by the committee of creditors. That was approved by the NCLT or the adjudicating authority. You can't ask now to bring force majeure into it. Yes, like Singapore, which brought a general law of force majeure for everybody, it was possible for this country to do so. We have not done so far. So I don't think a resolution applicant who has got his already plans approved will get a right by virtue of 10A to go back to the NCLT and then get it approved. And I ask myself a question and answer it also. Supposing that resolution plan was challenged in NCLT and then gone to the Supreme Court. So now the resolution plan is actually approved by the Supreme Court. So how will the NCLT get jurisdiction to do so? So these are questions which may arise, and probably, please, they're good questions for all of us, because that will give us also work from unemployment. So there's nothing wrong about it. But having said that, I do not think the resolution applicant will get a right by virtue of looking at 10A to go back to the adjudicating authority or to the appellate authority or to the Supreme Court to say, please grant me anything, leverage or extension, relying on 10A. On a facts of a case, possible. I'm not saying the jurisdiction of the NCLT or the adjudicating authority has gone away. But yes, during implementation is also supervisory jurisdiction of the company court only. The adjudicating authority is still there. It's not that it goes away. But consequently, yes, in a hard case, you may be able to make out a case on facts, possible. But I don't think 10A will come to his aid.
I think I totally agree, sir, but not 10A, but equity will definitely prevail.
That's right. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But you'll have to keep in mind that the adjudicating authority under the IBC does not have a power of review.
Yeah.
Absolutely right, Chandok sir. We have, Chandok sir, many times discussed this issue. In fact, you would recall when I spoke to you probably on 23rd or 24th of March itself, when we were considering that 31st March was the last day for implementing the plan in case of Orchid Pharmaceuticals and Dhanuka. We were advising Dhanuka, the resolution applicant, and we were wondering whether lockdown would affect. And actually it affected, but somehow we were able to get support from the lenders, and then we implemented the plan before the deadline. But in a matter which is judgment has already been given, what you said is absolutely what NCLT adjudicating authority has followed in the matter of Big Jam, where affidavit was filed in April quoting the same reasons, not force majeure, but obviously all these difficulties, wherein now I'm asking myself whether, and Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh is also here, probably if somebody has to challenge, the matter would reach to your lordship again, then at that stage it will be questioned whether the power of review is there or not. But as of now, you are right, Chandok Saab, that breather is being given in a way by adjudicating authority. Whether they have the power of review or not is another question which is to be examined, or whether they can do it under the inherent powers which otherwise are there in NCLT rules, but under the IBC they don't have inherent powers, as you know, and we have interacted many times. Balwinder sir, Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh, let me ask you the first question which we have received from participants. This question is asked by Mr. J.K. Grover, who is a leading insolvency professional in Chandigarh. He in fact sought my view on it. I said we are fortunate. He asked me this question yesterday. I said this will be the first question, we'll have it today. Now, Honorable NCLAT and IBBI both. So IBBI introduced 40C regulation and excluded the time period of this lockdown, which was announced by central government. Whereas if you see the order passed by Honorable NCLAT, the suo motu order, that talks about the central government and state government both. So if I read, it says that the period of lockdown ordered by the central government and state government, including the period as may be extended either in whole or part of the country, shall be excluded. Now this order was passed suo motu on 30th of March 2020. Now the questions are two. Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh, the questions are two. First question, central government in a way has already lifted the lockdown. This is unlock 1 already going on, and the lockdown in a way is only there where there is a containment zone. So what these RPs should do with regard to the time period from 31st of May or from 1st of June till 30th June, whether this period should be excluded from the CIRP timelines? This is the first question. If you can answer, there is a supplementary question which I will ask after you answer and share your views on this, sir. Sir, over to you.
I will again go back what I said earlier. You see, these are the twin sections which we will talk about legality and we will talk about the practicability. You see, these are the two factors which has to be taken into consideration. When we talk about legality and practicability, because when we issued a suo motu order here, it is actually basically practicability point of view. Because you come to the court also and we are not holding the court. So there are so many things. Similarly, now when you say talk about containment zone, there are some business which are not supposed to be open even today. So probably it has to go by fact to fact only then. Because you see some business like, I mean, there are so many businesses which are absolutely restricted even to be open today, like cinema hall and other kind of things and other things. So those things probably continue to be inoperative. So the business, I mean, from that point of view, they have another difficulty. One where containment zones and other, we have already withdrawn our restrictions, and then they are having another aspect. Similarly, like we are holding only virtual courts and all, many times we are finding, we say that something, this order till next date of hearing, but the next date of hearing may come itself also 2 months, 3 months. So in the period in between, we are something where as a suspended animation. We do not know either this way or to that way too. Now, as far as this period which IBBI has given an order, I think probably from IBBI order, it was probably slightly in a different context than the ordinance. You see, because ordinance has given her the timelines. You see, that is for institution. It has not talked about anything. No, it has not talked about anything. But when you talk to NCLT or NCLT, it will be looked into from the practical point of view, whether at that point of time it was able to move it or not, whether the business legally has not been allowed to go on. So probably that has to be looked into from case to case basis. It will be each case and what level which has happened. So I think probably that will be an area which probably have to be looked at from individual point of view. An aggregate point of view, it doesn't deal with, the ordinance has not dealt with that part. It has talked about suspension of initiation. It has not talked about suspending anything else. Because in any case, over a period of time, from time to time, we have been taking a practical point of view where it was not possible to do it. Periods have been excluded. And I think so that probably where it will be, I mean, brought to the notice that it was not possible to do it, that kind of leeway we will give.
Right. Thank you, sir. What I understand from you is that in each matter, each facts of the case will have to be seen. Chandok sir, would you please supplement this? Because I feel earlier we all were thinking that this is automatic and this can be excluded by the IP in his own time schedule. And there is no need for one to move an application to the adjudicating authority. But what fell from Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh is that in a way, an application may have to be moved, specifically seeking exclusion of time from the adjudicating authority. Chandok Sahab, your views, please.
Look, the position is if there is a general order passed by the appellate tribunal that a particular time period will be excluded and is so moto order, then that is only a question of implementation by the RP. I don't think it needs to go on a fax. But supposing NCLT and ask for time, there's no choice because the period of lockdown is over. But because of my facts and circumstances, I am not able to run the show. I'm not able to keep up my timelines. I'll have to go back to the adjudicating authority or to the appellate authority to say, please exclude a further period of time till normalcy gets restored. So obviously, they're two separate chapters. They're two separate things. One is a general order so moto passed by the court, which says this period will be excluded. That period, I don't think you need to go back. I think the Honorable Balwinder Singh Ji was saying that if there are facts and circumstances which require any further time for you other than what the court has provided, certainly, because that lockdown one was one prior to that date order. Order is 30th March. The lockdown has already come. Therefore, the period was excluded from 30th March till such time the government says lockdown is over. Now, government has said lockdown is over. Unlock one is started. So whether after the unlock one is started, you're not able to run it. You're not able to keep your timelines because of your special circumstances. Obviously, you'll have to go back to the court to say, please exclude this time also.
So for this, thank you, Chandok sir, for this 30th, for these 30 days of June, one will have to go then in any case. That's the
right.
The hint which I get from you. And
Yes.
Chandok sir, there is one supplementary question. Chandok sir, there is one supplementary question which I am curious to ask you, and this is I am directly asking you. When I read the Supreme Court order, Honorable Apex Court order of 23rd March, which was the first order on the same day when Honorable Prime Minister announced day before rather, and excluded the time period for all limitation purposes. Now, when you see the second order passed by Honorable Supreme Court, which is 6th of June, in that order, sir, the second paragraph, now they have changed. So earlier my reading of the first order of 23rd March was that if you had 3 months on 23rd March, then whenever Supreme Court notifies that date, you will have 3 months from the date whenever that limitation would be lifted. But now when you read the 6th June order, now they have restricted. So now they say if your limitation period is getting over after 23rd March, because they have extended that date, and now they say if your limitation is over after 23rd March and before the date which will be notified by Supreme Court again, then you will have only 15 days from that date to file your proceedings, to file your appeal, to file your petitions, to file your case. And I personally feel this will clock down. I mean, 15 days all over country, filings, different under the Limitation Act. How many filings and how everything would go on in only in 15 days?
Well, I always see when there is a calamity, when there is a COVID-19, on one hand, I see darkness, but on the other hand, I also see a great opportunity. This is one part. The second part of it is what the Supreme Court is actually intending to say, as I read that order of June, is that if your period of limitation is expired, then your period of limitation from that period, 15 days, you will still get for the purpose of going to the court. It's not that, see, normally speaking, supposing I was in the last day of my limitation and this 25th March order came, then I should file it on the reopening on the very first day. Let me give you a simpler example. My limitation to file an appeal expires on 1st of June 2020 in normal times. And 1st June 2020, the courts were closed for summer vacation. Limitation gets automatically extended to me on the reopening of the particular court, whether it's NCLT, NCLT, Supreme Court, High Court, or anywhere. Now, this is only providing you a further leverage of 15 days. That even if your lockdown gets over today, you still get 15 days to file your petition. So another extension of 15 days is given. There's nothing wrong about it. They have given you a more time rather than giving you less time. Many of us are interpreting it saying 15 days from, some people have interpreted 15 days from 25th March. How can it be possible? So whenever the lockdown gets over, whenever the date gets notified by the Supreme Court, you will get 15 days time to file your special leave petitions. That's what I'm meaning to say. If your period of limitation has expired, let's test your case. That on 25th March, you still had 2 months. Then what will happen? So this time is extended time for you. But your limitation has expired during this time. Consequently, you must file it on reopening day. So instead of filing on reopening day, you will file it from the date notified 15 days there, within 15 days thereafter. And I don't think this should really trouble any one of us, because I can assure you, with the experience one has, the Supreme Court or any adjudicating authority or any court, this is an extraordinary situation. We are not passing through normal times. We are not passing through times which a man-made situation, irrespective of what USA says or what China has to say. We are not looking into that controversy. The fact of the matter is, while on one hand we are saving lives, on the other hand we have to save economy, the livelihood of people. And if we are looking at all this as a principle within the meaning of the Constitution under Article 21, then I don't think court is going to take a stringent view that you did not come on the 14th day and you came on the 16th day. I think the court will be extremely liberal looking at the situation in which we are passing. And I think the honorable member has made it clear. It is possible. I am giving an example of today. In two colonies of the South Delhi, though the government has not declared it as a containment zone, the RWs have put it, because they thought they should look at the residents of the people, where there are people who are suffering. Why should they not come to the aid of the people? No, this will be a circumstance that will weigh with the court to see that this had happened and consequently it was beyond your. So I don't think this issue should bother us at all. I am not looking at it from that point of view. The court is going to be liberal so far as COVID-19 limitation is concerned.
Thank you, sir, for this much needed. Otherwise, this clarification was otherwise also needed. Supreme Court has given this clarification and you have further explained it. Thank you, sir. Gaurav.
Mr. Chandok, I have another question for you. That by insertion of the proviso to section 10A, the COVID default, as we may say so, would be out of the eligible default under IBC, as a result of which it can never be done as a no filing can never be done for such default. There are reports about the question of constitutional validity of this proviso, uh, particularly when it disentitles the creditors from filing applications forever. So would it have been better if doctrine of eclipse could have been applied rather than barring forever for not filing of application for COVID default? And can this proviso be successfully challenged before courts in near future?
Let me give you a different example and come back to your question straight away. Delhi Legislative Assembly, you all know, had amended the Court Fees Act. And for example, they said an award will be stamped at the time of announcing the award. It will be again put to court fee ad valorem when you challenge it under Section 34. You will again pay ad valorem court fee when you come to execute the award. So the question was, is it constitutionally valid? And we challenged that. It came before 5 benches of the High Court. All the benches, of course, recused themselves. But everybody advised me, Mr. Chandok, this is not going to be sustained. And ultimately, we succeeded right up to the Supreme Court. And that judgment of Delhi High Court is one of the best judgments of 2013 in Cornell's assessment. So why should you not say that we can't challenge it? I am not going to say that you can't challenge anything. You can challenge the entire ordinance on many grounds. But the question today is, what is the intent behind it? The intent is you are not going to treat me as a defaulter during COVID this time. That's all. But if I have committed a default prior to that date, or I'll continue to commit default thereafter, the default is still there, then it's nothing going to save him. It's not going to say that because for COVID you are not a defaulter, so default committed in January you can't be a defaulter. Default committed after COVID, whenever it ends, will not be a default. So therefore, please look at that part in the totality of Section 10A. I can't look at that part into isolation. The intent is clear that because of unprecedented circumstances that we have placed, the government had declared lockdown. This default will not be treated as a default for the purposes of filing an IBC. That's all. But if there are other defaults, you're not going to condone the explanation explained. So supposing there was a default on January or February, Section 7 has not been suspended. And in any event, I asked myself, suspension of Section 7, 9 or 10 has not suspended, as Satwinder has already said. I can go under 230. 7 June circular is available. I have a DRT available. The forums have not been closed. And it is, I must beg to, with all humility, put before you all, I think the very purpose of IBC was not what we have achieved so far. We have only created our NPAs. That was not the purpose of IBC. IBC was meant for a different purpose altogether. The intent of the code is totally different. And I want to give you an example from without any manner asking Vash and Company to be looked at. Any law firm, for example, is an LLP. And that law firm, supposing that provision was inapplicable. And a resolution applicant is Satwinder, who is Sir, Satwinder Sir. He moves an application. The adjudicating authority is not going to look at his bank balance. It must look at his legal acumen to bring that law firm back into position. The purpose of IBC was, how do you bring resolution to that corporate debtor? How do you bring him back into the economy for the sake of nation? The purpose was not NPAs of the bank, as we have done so far. Therefore, I am saying the purpose of intent of the IBC was totally different. And I'm looking for that day when a creditor in possession will probably look at a larger stakeholder's interest in a corporate debtor and pass a resolution plan. I'm waiting for that day, actually.
Great, Chandok Saab, for explaining this beautifully. I think you mentioned that the objective of IBC was not what we have achieved so far. In fact, Dr. Sahu always say that the best use of IBC is in not using it. So let me ask Dr. Charan Singh here. Dr. Charan Singh, since Chandok Saab mentioned that the objective of IBC is very different and not what we have always seen. And people are saying that we have improved so much of NPAs have reduced and the recovery has been done for banks. No, ordinance doesn't take into account that RBI has permitted the banks and financial institutions the moratorium in terms of the provisions already announced by RBI. At the same time, it is reported in many news reports which I have also read that banks are keen for suspension of IBC provisions even for pending CIRP matters. So, we are wondering what does the banks want? Whether they want and whether this ordinance has affected the financial creditors because they are otherwise also getting the moratorium from RBI, and whether they really want this IBC and whether it is helping and working for them.
Look, this question I would like to answer as an economist and not as a banker, because I generally don't mix the two things, and I should not mix the two things. My answer would be yes, you're right. The creditors also need some assurance that their money is recoverable, and therefore IBC played a very prominent role there. And IBC's recovery pattern was any day better than any of the others. So therefore, yes, it served purpose. Now the issue is, as I look at as an economist, that with the IBC suspension for some time, and I mentioned it in my earlier interaction, there is every chance that the stress on the balance sheet of companies will transmit to the balance sheet of commercial banks. Moratorium is there, that is true. But in case the IBC is suspended to that extent, the stress on the balance sheet of commercial banks, I think, is going to increase. But that is okay, because if you look at how the economy works, and these are most of the time public sector banks, look at how the economy works, the priorities have to be very clear. The first priority is save lives, which they are doing to the best possible extent. The second is save businesses, which again an attempt is being made by assuring the business that, okay, we will not invoke IBC for a certain time. The banks can be financed, because these are government owned, most of it, can be financed or accommodated by the regulator for some time. So I think their priority is right, and I think their approach is good. And I would not really say because moratorium was there, was IBC really required or not. I think IBC has served an important purpose in assuring the business houses, which is important. Thank you.
So my next question is to Satendra sir. Sir, as you know that the government is contemplating a new framework for IBC for MSMEs. What broader issues do you feel should also be addressed while considering the framework for MSMEs? If I could get your comments.
I think, Gaurav, I'll take a cue first from what Mr. Chandok has said just now. On that default part, which we were saying, I am just extending it. Now, it is a COVID default for which the filing of application under IBC is not allowed. But look at the situation now under the MSME. If you have not paid the money to the MSMEs, right, then statutorily you are supposed to pay within 45 days, or otherwise you also have to pay the interest, which is 3 times of the bank rate, which you have to pay under section 16 of the MSME. That's the one part which I'm just making it is. I think the point is that they have said that, okay, filing of application as for regard, but your liability is not over. You are still liable to pay to the MSMEs. And there is a difference between the default and the claim which you have to make it. The claim is different than the default. Your claim is there, your liability is there. To some extent, I feel that tomorrow, if you say that you can get over from that liability, probably that.
Am I,
There are situations that companies which were earlier in MSMEs are no more the MSMEs. Now, if your default has happened prior to this when you were MSME, right? And after that, you are no more MSME, then what would be the situation? That can also, then is probably which I'm just making it is that what about those which are, because initially which said that, okay, at certain specified circumstances, this COVID default situation is coming. But what about those MSMEs who are providing the essential services? They are not getting payment. There is no mechanism. I was told by somebody that you are taking both micro, small, and medium scale industries in the same part. There is no mechanism how they have to get it. Your provision with regard to inability to pay debt under 434 of the Companies Act, that has been taken away. You don't have the right to go for a winding up. The only point is that, okay, you have to go now because they are the operational creditors. You have to just go and file a suit for recovery in that case. And if you have to file a suit for recovery, you have to pay a fee for that also. So the other day, I was asked by somebody that they are micro and small. They said, I'm supplying into the medium scale companies. They are in turn is coming. They are saying that, okay, I am also this thing. What would be the mechanism? So that's another point which I'm just making it is. So my point, probably I will ask Mr. Sahu or whosoever is there, maybe I'll give my suggestions that is there any possibility of categorization within the MSME also and bring it, because they are bringing a new framework under 240A, which is already, which they are making it is. Another aspect I would like to highlight to the regulator, maybe that, okay, if they can consider, you look at it, when we are saying it, whether I am MSME or not, the first thing is coming and there is a contradictory decisions where whether the registration is required or not. Now you look at the judgment given by the Delhi High Courts, by the Andhra Pradesh High Court, by the Allahabad High Court. They says no, registration is not mandatory, it is discretionary. But Bombay High Court and Gujarat High Court has said no, it is mandatory. So there is a confusion to that aspect for this thing. Companies are taking it up that I am not considering you MSME because you don't have a registration. So it is contrary to the judgments which have been given by the Delhi High Court or Andhra Pradesh High Court to that extent. Now, when probably it requires a clarity that when you are bringing that framework, and there are, I think, most of the cases which are coming was of that MSMEs, are you looking at it is that it is as good as MSME and registration is required or not required? I would prefer that when they bring that framework, at least they must clarify whether that registration is required or not. I was the other day going through a very important aspect of this was in Germany. For MSME, they put it a condition, and I am very impressed for this. The debtor has to give a certification to the adjudicating authority to say that within, for the preceding 6 months, whether you had efforts were made for the settlement, and the settlement is not. So they have brought in the
Yes, somebody else.
I think both Mr. Satinder Singh and NPS Chawla have got disconnected. Maybe they're connecting again. In the meantime, I'll just ask one question to Mr. Balwinder Singh. Sir, in section 8, section 10 is also suspended. Now, the corporate debtor will continue to be faced with mounting interest or the compounding interest, etc., and will never be able to take recourse to filing of its resolution process, whereas its liabilities continue to grow. How far do you feel that such restriction on the corporate debtors who are barred for their own resolutions is justifiable?
No, you look into this from the two angles. What is today to bring out an application? You see, if already application has been given by him before that cut-off date, that is 25th March, so probably there is no bar on continuing whatever it has to be done. Now, since he cannot institute under IBC today, at least for a period of 6 months or probably more as the situation may emerge, there is no bar in him having the alternative modes. You see, if he is not already under stress, that means the stress is just recent now. Because earlier, if other side is there, that is different matter. Now, since he wants to move it today, he can explore and utilize this time actually to have an alternative mechanism. I mean, there is already a provision, because if you are with the banker, you can actually interact with them and do something. As earlier already pointed, you can make a compromise program under 230. Those things are not, options are available with him. It is only that he himself cannot start today. So I don't think so that there is a much difficulty in that if that is suspended for some time. Because if you really see as an intent, in fact, actually, I always have been making a point. Our resolution plans, in fact, actually, that our company at 230, 32, etc., whatever is being done is actually the resolution plan. Those sections, normally 230, 32, etc., they have been utilized when the company has a stress, but probably it still has a credibility in the market to have compromise. When the things have reached into a situation where some sort of deadlock exists, or probably either the management is not confident that creditors will go with me or shareholders will go with me, the option is to go by IBC. See, so that period is still with them, and now section 10 doesn't impact them because they don't have to start today, but they can always explore the alternative mechanisms.
Right, sir. Mr. Chandok, my next question is to you. Sir, there's a general rule that every new amendment will be considered prospectively, unless specifically mentioned to be applied retrospectively. Now, what would be the scenario when the default would be in the nature of a continuing default, that is continuing after 6 months, which is the initial period given? And is there any possibility when you interpret the ordinance in such situations, keeping in mind the principles of statutory interpretation?
Look, if the period ends or the 6 months period is not extended under the ordinance, then post 6 months, if the default still continues, not for the period of the 6 months time, but default on the 7th month time, then obviously the IBC will come back to its position. It's not known. I don't require anything. The question is, you can't treat this lockdown period or the period of 6 months as given in the ordinance as a period of default. But if the 6 months is not extended, for example, then there's a default in the 7th month, whether it's continuing or not continuing. Every month you have to nurse your debts. So default will even come on the 7th month. So the moment that default occurs, you will entitled to come back to it. So it's not a case where you see, I think the word used is we have suspended these 3 provisions. We have not taken them out of the IBC. They still remain. For all intents and purposes, these 7, 9 and 10 still remain part of the code. So if that would be the position, if we were to say they are suspended, then how will the adjudicating authority look at the pending matters or resolution plans which have not been approved, or RPs, how will they continue with it? Because if the very initiation stands suspended, argument can go any length. I would say if the initiation is suspended, everything else gets suspended. It's not dependent upon it. The explanation says if default is committed prior to it, I can still file it before now. For that purpose, 7, 9 or 10, all three are not applicable. The suspension doesn't come into operation. Therefore, I don't think that is a place, has any place or any legal sanctity to where I have to look at interpretation of anything.
Thank you, Chandok Saab. In fact, there is one question which has been asked to me also, and I gave my view, but certainly your interpretation is very different, and the way, the clarity with which you will certainly answer this, whether this code is retrospective or prospective. From the bare reading, it is prospective, but the question is what with regard to the defaults, and I'm not sure because we got disconnected in between whether Gaurav asked this question, because this question we received, Chandok sir, that and that particularly the question, what about the defaults before 24th March? So before 24th March, if there is a default of 75 lakhs, and on that day, so there is a default, Chandok sir, on 23rd March, which occurred, and on 23rd March, the default threshold was 1 lakh, and the default is of 75 lakhs. So whether that creditor can still file the proceedings?
Two answers to that question straight away. I think when you amended section 4 by the notification, my recollection is subject to correction by you, any one of you. It said that all matters which are pending will also abide by this position. Now, therefore, the question today is the threshold is there. So till the petition is admitted and section 14 order is passed, IBC doesn't get triggered off. Please consider it. We saw that happening in many matters, that we filed the petition, but the corporate debtor started negotiating, for example, and we arrived at a settlement. Matter went away. It didn't require 12A. 12A didn't get triggered off. So the question is, IBC only gets triggered once the adjudicating authority passes an order declaring it to be moratorium. Unless that 14 order comes in, IBC doesn't start. Unlike, look at, I think I can give you a general principle of law, common law. Look at order 3 or order 4 in the Code of Civil Procedure. It says I may file a plaint if that plaint satisfied order 6, rule 2 and 4. The court will convert the plaint into a suit. And that's why order 39, for example, most of us start feeling it's an interlocutory application. The words used in the statute are, in a suit the court finds, the question arises. So therefore, the IBC gets triggered off not by filing an application or a section 7 or 9 or 10. It is only when section 14 an order gets passed, that is where the IBC actually gets triggered off. Consequently, all those petitions, subject to, of course, the interpretation which the adjudicating authority might have to give. But my view would be all those petitions, if they lack less than 1 crore on that day. Now, the distinction that I'm trying to draw is distinction is between retrospectivity and retroactivity. Take, for example, we decided under section 5 of the Hindu Succession Act to say the daughter will be a co-partner. And that co-partnership relates back to the date of birth. Though she was co-partner on the date of her birth, but her right gets only recognized in 2005. So on 2005, it relates back to that day. So consequently, the doctrine of relating back comes where? In other words, till 14 gets passed, the jurisdiction of the adjudicating authority does not come into play. What prevents me to withdraw it beforehand? Nobody can stop me. 12A doesn't require me. So these are questions which I don't think should hold us up on that question.
And sir, what about the continuing default, in the sense the default in this COVID period, maybe 6 months or 1 year, is 75 lakhs, and after these 6 months or 1 year is over, then whether you will count this amount of 75 lakhs in counting the total default of 1 crore, which will
75 lakhs you will count definitely, but the question is this period of 6 months you can't count.
period you can't
Because
count, but
75 lakhs default, this default can't be counted to come to here. That's the question that certainly requires consideration. Because this is not treated by fiction of law as default. You have created a fiction in law that for these 6 months, you will not treat him as a defaulter. This is not a default. That's why it says the word used in section 10AR, on or after 25th March 2020. See the words of the section 10A. The word is on or after. So it would not be default if the default is committed on or after that date. So whether that can be added back once the default gets over, if it is not treated in law to be a default, then it can't be clubbed. Yes, that will be a question which the adjudicating authority will have to answer. That once that default period has ended, it can't be that the claim can't go away, because on that day, the principal sum would still be due. Therefore, you will treat that part at least a default and club it with 175 lakhs and probably file a petition post-COVID time, post 6 months.
right, sir.
But I think a lot of things have to be happening, and I think these are opportunities for all of us.
Absolutely.
So it's 6:20. We're past 6:20, and we'd given 10 minutes for question and answers from the attendees. We have received few queries. So my next question, quick question, is to Mr. NPS Chawla, which is one of the queries received from the attendees. That whether filing of claims under IBC would be barred for debts which fall in default during this period, and if the corporate debtor is admitted into CIRP for a debt which fell into default before 25th of March 2020.
I couldn't hear you fully, but Gaurav, whatever I heard, Chandok Saab, in fact, he gave the answer in a way to this claims. You know, claims, in my view, certainly can be filed even in this COVID period. It can be filed because the definition of claims is so wide in IBC. It includes disputed, undisputed, matured, judgment, fixed, whatever it is. So, and in my view, claim can be filed even for this COVID default, because claims is very different from initiation. So the bar is on initiation. What Chandok Saab mentioned, that on or after 25th March. But if you see the proviso to 10A, so the proviso in a way takes away the COVID default from the definition of default itself, that you can't take an initiation action ever. But it nowhere mentions that you can't file the claim. Chandok Saab is nodding, which means I am not wrong. So you can go on to
right, absolutely. There's no dispute on that issue. Because you see, in this COVID time also, it's not that the amount becomes extinguished. The amount still remains repayable. It can't be treated as default. Supposing he was to pay you 10 lakh rupees an installment in a term loan, and he could not pay you those 10 lakhs. That 10 lakhs can't be treated as default. But that doesn't mean 10 lakhs go evaporated. It's not a waiver of that amount. It will still be amount due post-COVID, and you will add it into a claim and file your claim.
Yeah. But I think sir, the time is short and we have to make it. There are few questions. I also have one important question is, when we are making it that the corporate debtor through that ordinance which is coming, why the personal guarantors are out of the ambit of ordinance? Can I ask Honorable Balwinder Singh Ji to kindly comment upon it, that how it will operate when there is no default? I'm taking it for and I can't take an action. Can I go away and straightway take that action against the personal guarantor?
I think we are little bit stretching it a little bit too far. And let's break it into two parts. If the corporate debtor is a guarantor, so it is obviously covered because that will come under chapter 2 only.
Yeah.
Now corporate, okay, that will be coming under chapter 2 only if it was a corporate debtor and the guarantor is also a corporate. Now you talk about the personal guarantor. Now we have an enactment that when personal guarantor, you will start with a personal guarantor, the default has to be there, isn't it? Now personal guarantor, no, if the personal guarantor is a defaulter, the notice has to be, and it has to start in the chapter 3. It will not start under chapter 2 so far for the time being, isn't it? Because it will have to start from chapter 3. And since it has, I mean, chapter means part 3 actually. So when the chapter, this enactment is not talking about part 3. This is talking about part 2 only. So you cannot directly link it that way. Because in case already some insolvency is going on, or the person who is a personal guarantor, his insolvency has to start, it will come into NCLT, but it will not come into 7, 10 and 9, 10. It will not come 7, 9 and 10. It will actually move it from part 3 to part 2 only. So I cannot see that there is a direct linkage there.
I think point taken. Point taken. I think that's the. NPS, you have any point for this?
Yeah, Chandok here. Although Honorable Mr. Balwinder Singh has shared his views on personal guarantees, time is less, but still there is one issue which is again hogging our mind with regard to corporate guarantee, and particularly when the default in the principal borrower occurred before the 25th March cutoff date, and now the corporate guarantee is being invoked after 25th March. So whether the right of the creditor, yes, sir.
I can see. You see, from this date onward, you see, how do you invoke the corporate guarantee? Now the question is this part only. In case you have to give a notice, or otherwise it is coterminous. If it is a coterminous, the default is earlier. If you have to give a notice, then you have to give a notice today, isn't it? So he comes into and operate as a corporate debtor, and application has to go into under section 7 there. That will get hit. Because otherwise, if it is coterminous, so the default is already taking place. If there is a possibility. Yeah.
Chandok sir, would you like to supplement this?
No, I am only saying this, brother, that the corporate guarantee, when the default took place prior to that date of 25th March, and if he had already, a condition was that he will invoke the corporate guarantee. That's all. His cause of action is prior to that date. His cause of action is not a default committed post 25th March.
Absolutely.
There's a distinction. If the default is post 25th March, he can't invoke it.
Yes.
Unless the terms of the guarantee provide for it. Now, please look at it, what we looked at. In fact, I think the best person, though he said he's only talking as an economist, but knowing all of you as a bankers, the bank guarantee, that a personal guarantee that we give to a bank, we say, notwithstanding that I waive the loan to the principal debtor, notwithstanding that the principal debtor is not liable, notwithstanding that the principal debtor is insolvent, you will continue to be liable as between me, that means a guarantor, and the bank. I am a principal debtor. These are the words of this guarantee. Take up any guarantee. Now, if these are the words of the corporate guarantee, and I even invoke it prior to that date, or invoke it post, will not make a difference. It is the default which gives me a cause of action. And the default is prior to 25th March, certainly I can file section 7. Then it's not suspended.
Right. Thank you, Chandok sir. You hinted that Dr. Charan Singh can certainly share his views, but again, as an economist, since he has already mentioned it, but Dr. Charan Singh, may I ask you a little different question, which Chandok sir, I can certainly assure you that he can take hours and hours session on this aspect, being the president of Insol India. Everybody was expecting that our country may also see some pre-pack schemes as it works abroad, as you know. Do you feel you have so much experience? You can briefly answer whether the pre-pack schemes for resolving insolvency, which is a trusted model abroad, can become reality in our country and will work?
No comments on that.
Correct. No problem, sir. Chandok sir, we have received so many questions, but one question with regard to 66. Now, 66 doesn't include liquidation. There 66 section 3, the introduction. They are not applicable on one liquidation. And what is your view? Although in my opening remarks, I gave some view on it. But
I can't
your
hear
view
you,
on
Mr.
it.
Chawla. I can't hear your question. What's your question? Is 66.3?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So 66.3 is obviously meant. I think the answer already came in the discussion today, that we found that the circumstances in a pandemic, in COVID-19, were extraordinary. You don't expect people to have due diligence. How do you expect now today?
I am not able to hear Chandok sir. Gaurav,
No, I cannot also hear.
RP, he's running the entire show. He can't go to the factory. He can't go to the office of the corporation, to the directors for the purpose of COVID-19 only. But if you're able to show, I'm going a step further, that a benefit may not accrue to me, if notwithstanding that it was brought to my notice and I could have rectified that defect sitting at home, I did not do it and allowed somebody of my own to do that fraud, that won't be possible to go out of it. Therefore, you'll have to read 66 subclause 3 in the context of doing something in the regular course of its functioning, which his impediment is created, which he could not do. But if I intentionally do something, 63 is not going to come to my aid. I'll still be liable for it. And I ask myself whether the provision of Companies Act of misfeasance will go away. The answer is no.
No.
I'm a director. And if I'm guilty of misfeasance, these sections will apply. You can always go there also. So the question is not that the
you are not able to hear Chandok sir. Satvinder sir, in the meantime, since you are not able to hear Chandok sir, what about 29A? You mentioned about MSME, Satvinder sir. Let me ask you. This question we have
only
received.
to give some breather,
Ek-
give breather to the industry. That's all, nothing more.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Chandok sir. Satvinder sir, since you
Yeah.
mentioned about MSME, Tariq Malik from Acre has asked us whether 29A would be exempted for MSME framework.
See, 29A from that time, see, if you see the section 240A NPS, it was taken it up for this thing that as regard the 29A is concerned, that will be MSMEs are included, they can have their resolution plan, they can participate in that resolution plan. If I look at it,
Correct.
240A, that was very clear on that aspect. And this is the purpose for which the 240A was brought in. And now under that section only they are talking about is that they will bring a new framework. And probably to my mind, they will, you see, bring in subsection or the regulations along with that, where they will provide a detailed framework for this. That's the 240A.
Chandok sir, would you like to supplement this?
No, I am saying this. What is happening is, Chawla Sahab, you see the Income Tax Act is a given living example. Every finance act would act AA, BB, ZZ, CC. Why can't they reframe 240A and bring the entire framework what they want to bring in?
Yeah.
Why are we leaving ambiguity to it? Re-amend it, reenact it. Why should these ambiguities to add subsection 2, then add proviso, then add an explanation? There's no need for it. But the problem, therefore, I'm saying is the legislative department must consider, and I want to bring home and use your forum today to say, time has come when legislative activity must be given to a practitioner who practices that law. He should be the best person to guide you what should be the provisions of law as to be amendments or to elect. The time has come when you should involve the judicial process into it. In fact, you see Singapore, any legislation that has come, the chairman of that committee who recommends what legislation is going to be is the Supreme Court judge. Therefore, it's time that We must look at all these things. We are in a changed world today. We are in a changed environment today. Let us change our old traditional methods, that instead of I am the sole man to do everything. It should come as we. And we should learn this from our constitution, where the constitution maker said, we the people of republic. So we the people come in, I'm sure the country will go bounce itself back into economy and go whatever it wants to do.
Right. Thank you, Chandok Saab. We have already exceeded that time limit by 7 minutes. We have received so many questions. Few of them we have already asked. Few others we'll separately try to answer. Time is short. In fact, Chandok Saab was in a Supreme Court meeting, and Dr. Charan Singh was also in board meeting of NABARD, and he had to leave that, and then he joined us. Balvinder sir was also caught up because they are hearing matters from Monday to Friday. I think Satvinder sir, if you can conclude, then we can separately have these answers on the questions maybe later on.
No, I can only say that I can sincerely thank to Mr. Chandok, Dr. Charan Singh ji and Balvinder, who have acceded to our request. And I know that despite their so much busy schedule, I was asking Mr. Chandok, he's straight away from here, he's going to participate the meeting with the Supreme Court judge there for this. So, and probably he was asking that, okay, I will spend 6:30, and for us, he made it that he will join after 6:30. Thank you, Chandok Saab. Thank you, Dr. Charan Singh ji. Thank you, Balvinder Singh sir, for making this webinar so lively and giving your inputs. And I hope that all the participants who have attended this webinar, they must have been benefited from the words of wisdom which you have given today. And I'm just making it is that we will, whatever the questions which have been left, we will try to see and give our comments on their questions separately for this thing. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us, and it's an honor to ILF. It's an honor to Vaishya Associates. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.